Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. In the 1650s, the fur trading company that was managing Canada brought its official business to a halt. That left the back door, or rather, the backwoods, open to some enterprising young men who began to range the woods on their own, earning the nickname Coureurs de Bois, or Wood Rangers. They dealt directly with the northern Aboriginal trappers. Between 1667 and 1680, merchants set out into the interior of the continent, where they created new alliances with native peoples. Hundreds of Frenchmen left the colony for the Pays d'en Haut, the area around the Great Lakes. And a new breed of traders, the Coureurs de Bois, emerged. An anonymous chronicler described their lives in a document bearing the picturesque title, Historical Brief on the Ill Effects of Bringing the Beaver Together Under One Band. The unknown writer claimed, the life of the Coureurs de Bois is one of continual idleness, which leads to all sorts of excesses. They sleep, smoke, drink spirits, and often ravish the wives and daughters of the Indians. They live in a state of complete independence. They account for their actions to nobody. They recognize no superior, no judge, no laws, no police, no subordination. North of Maine, the first European colonies were French, and their reason for being was fur, primarily beaver. By 1608, when the first permanent colony, Quebec, was founded, French fur traders had already been active around the Gulf and the lower St. Lawrence for 70 years or more. Fur remained the grand preoccupation of the French in Canada. Furs were obtained by trade with the natives. French fur traders courted the Native Americans with whom they did business. They were partners. The Indian nations were essential to the enterprise. The Native Americans wanted the wonderful kettles and hatchets of the foreigners, but the French wanted even more the help and goodwill of the natives. Their woodland skills, their knowledge of winter snowshoe traveling, their birch bark canoes, up to 40 feet in length, and the paddlers to man them. Their familiarity with the river and lake waterways to still more treasures of fur, and above all, the French wanted to maintain in working condition the tribal channels of trade. Where the English plantation colonies destroyed, as soon as possible, the indigenous cocoon around them, the French supported and sustained the Indian world in which they found themselves, for out of that world came fur. Thus the natives here were strengthened and enriched by white contact. The first fur trading partners of the French were the Huron and the Algonquian people of the lower St. Lawrence, principally the Montagnais and the numerous bands next above them on the river who were known collectively as the Algonquian proper. One of these bands, the Algonquin, being the original bearers of the name later applied by anthropologists to an enormous stock of related languages and peoples. The Hurons and Algonquins had been friends of the French for some time when in 1609, Samuel de Champlain, founder of Quebec and lieutenant of the owner of the French fur trade monopoly, went with the Huron and Algonquin war party on a long journey to the lake now known as Champlain. There he won a battle for them against the little army of their hated enemies, who had never before met firearms. The foe were bold in arrow-proof body armor made of plated sticks. But Champlain killed 2 of their 3 war captains and wounded the 3rd, and the bold foe broke and ran. The foe had been Mohawk. The Five Nations Iroquois nursed a dogged animosity towards the French, with only a few interludes of real peace from that time onward. In 1614, 5 years after this little battle with big consequences, Dutch fur traders built a trading post up the Hudson, near the present location of Albany, on the doorstep of the Mohawk country. The Dutch were also primarily in the beaver business. eager to uphold and sustain the forest nations who might act as district jobbers for them. Within 20 years or so, Iroquois fur salesmen were procuring guns from Dutch, English, and French traders. As spheres of trade expanded, a clear area of conflict came into being between French, Dutch, English, and Swedes. Likewise, a clear area of conflict came into being between Amerindian nations, stimulated and aggrandized by trade with Europeans, yet far enough from white settlements to remain reasonably independent. The earliest frontier did not move with Western European settlement, but with the aggressive expansion of Amerindian nations who were in business with Europeans. There were, in effect, two frontiers, one strictly Amerindian, the other, following years behind, European. Out of the hurricane belt of that Native American versus Native American frontier came winds that affected and sometimes determined the course of North American history. The Five Nations Iroquois became the determining force of this Native American versus Native American frontier in the Northeast. Perhaps favored by their strategic location, they were no colony's creature. They were from the beginning their own masters. They traded when all the magnificent oratory of the councils was done with whoever offered the best deal, all things considered. All the things considered made for a bewildering tangle of loyalties, emotions, and motives, as does any political action. But no European business partner could be confident of calling the tune, either for any of the separate Five Nations, who so often went their separate ways, or for the broad policy of the Confederacy as a whole. During the first half of the 17th century, the Five Nations, singly or otherwise, were sometimes at war, sometimes at peace with the French, and the French Amerindians to the north, Montagnais, Algonquin, Hurons, and the long-established river traders westward of the Hurons known as the Ottawa, from an Algonquian word meaning he buys. Evidently, the Ottawa were professional traders even in pre-European times. There were several Iroquois attempts in this period to form a coalition with the powerful and populous Hurons. Their failure may not have been due to Mohawk and Seneca resistance among the Iroquois, and French machinations among the Hurons to keep them at odds with the Five Nations, but these things at least played a part. The Hurons funneled through to New France whole canoe flotilla loads of pelts, taken in trade from the enormous country north and west of the lakes, a limitless country sparkling with streams and beautiful with beaver. The French felt they had the Hurons and this trade in their pocket. They feared to lose them to the more independent Five Nations. The Hurons had accepted missionaries, who from the times of Champlain had acted as the governor's agents in stirring up anti-Iroquois sentiment when needed. The Hurons themselves, being an Iroquoian people, the priests distinguished between them and the Five Nations by calling the Hurons the good Iroquois. Letters of missionaries published in France were loaded with extravagant praise of the Hurons and a continuous propaganda barrage against the Iroquois. In the summer of 1639, the Hurons captured and burned a total of 113 Iroquois, some from roaming war parties, some casual Iroquois travelers. Nevertheless, the Hurons remained, to the French, the good Iroquois, while the Five Nations were those demons, those tigers, those wolves. When, in the 1630s, repeated epidemics swept over the Hurons, reducing their population from an estimated 30,000 to an estimated 10,000, French administrators, writing home for more money, sometimes forgetfully attributed these plague losses to battle deaths at the hands of the bad Iroquois. Some 20 years after this, a French governor mentioned, "It was polite to exaggerate more than ever the cruelties of the Iroquois, revealing more by the qualifying phrase than by the statement." Spheres of power swelled. Guns became more common. Cardinal Richelieu's joint stock company, which had taken over and kept until 1645 the French fur trade monopoly, permitted trade in guns to Christian Indians, and there were thousands of baptized Hurons who could have qualified. But the French monopoly policy, with its attendant high prices, may have made them too dear a luxury. The traditional view has it that the Hurons were not so well armed as the Iroquois, who were made the possessors of some 400 muskets as of 1643. But the tensions rising on the Iroquois-Huron frontier seem to have come from equally aggressive pressure on each side. In 1648, Mohawk and Seneca war parties deliberately broke a truce with the Hurons that had been made in the name of the League. Their reasons for doing so are unfathomable, but may have been involved in intra-league politics. In the dead of the following winter, an overwhelming army of no less than 1,000 Mohawk and Seneca warriors suddenly invaded the heart of the Huron country in the area of Lake Simcoe and Georgian Bay, north of modern Toronto. Most of these troops are said to have wintered in Huron country, living off the snow-drifted land without the Hurons suspecting their presence, while the massive strike was being prepared. In 2 days of invasion and fighting, the mighty Huron Confederacy, outnumbering the 5 nations in population by perhaps 3 to 1, had been smashed, forever changing the North American fur trade. I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.